So I'm going to, take off from that and just try and explore a few things specifically related to bilingual education as such. And the reason I want to do this is that, we are focusing on education here at VMFT, but we do think that these new scientific knowledge, this new scientific knowledge from other areas, other disciplines, especially neuroscience and the science of the brain, has implications for how we should modify education also. Unfortunately, that kind of transdisciplinary exchange is not taking place so much in Kerala, but we hope we can help to take that forward. So I will be covering four top things really. First is about how babies are really geniuses, and Dr. George Villanelum explained about that. And from being geniuses, they start struggling with literacy when they come to school. And then I want to explain a little bit about some models of bilingual education and discuss the Kerala model. I'm not talking about the grand Kerala model, but just what is happening in Kerala. And like Dr. Villanelum, I won't be making recommendations, just giving some thoughts, some issues we need to consider. Actually, the biggest geniuses amongst us are infants. They are really the bilingual geniuses, in fact, multilingual also. So now recent studies, which don't involve invasive techniques of, getting into the brain, but some external kind of mapping of brain functions, show that babies are able to distinguish phonemes, which he introduced, that are related to their language. There are about 800 phonemes in the world's 7,000 odd languages that he mentioned, okay? And most languages have about 50 phonemes, those are the basic sound units. English, 44, Malayalam, about 50. I'm not talking about the alphabet, I'm talking about sounds. The interesting thing is, babies who listen to different languages, they are able to distinguish between their own language, right? The language that their parents and most of the people speak, and the others. That's why they don't get confused. Now, many children, as he said, half the world's children are monolingual, or people are monolingual, so they will be listening only to one language. But half are bilingual or multilingual. That's a large number. And these babies who grow up in such environments actually don't get confused. Next. So one recent study, actually you can look up the reference here, shows that at the age of 20 months, that's just over 1.5 years old, babies can efficiently and accurately process 2 languages, even when they are very distinct, like Chinese and English. And therefore, children growing up bilingual will not confuse 2 languages. This is an issue sometimes for parents who are monolingual, who think, well, the children will get confused, but this is not the case. And in fact, their brains activate in different situations, okay? The child's brain activates different vocabulary for that particular context. So if it's in a group that is speaking Malayalam, it will bring out the Malayalam words, and if it's in another group which is speaking English, it will bring out English, if it's familiar with both. So these are remarkable abilities that children have, apparently, miraculously. That's why by the age of 3, without really a lot of explicit teaching, though there is some teaching, by parents, without explicit teaching by, say, a trained teacher, children are able to speak. Now, how do parents speak? Well, it's called parentese, right? So, and it is found in every culture. So when the baby starts speaking, you will often hear the mother or the father saying, "Oh, how cute! Is that a sweet baby?" And keep repeating that, and you'll find expressions in Malayalam. So it's high-pitched, slow, repetitive, and then the baby starts laughing or smiling or something, and then the parent repeats that. So constantly the baby is getting that input and understanding that that is the language of communication. So that is an important factor, that parentese. So let's look at a few experiences. We know this also, but I want to give you a few experiences that I myself have encountered. So two parents with two different languages, one English, one Spanish, and one Swedish, they decide explicitly each parent will speak that particular language to the child. You know, and this is very common amongst Europeans. They all do it very explicitly. But English is the dominant language in society, so the child is already hearing three languages. In school, the child is being taught Spanish and English through a bilingual program, and the child learns English, Spanish, and Swedish, okay? In Africa, I've seen, you know, a colleague of mine, she comes from a particular Kenyan tribe, speaks that tribal language. Swahili is the lingua franca in Kenya, Tanzania, etc., a bit like Urdu in North India, how it used to be. It's a mixture of Arabic and local languages. And English, okay, which is like the official Kenyan language of government and so on. So the Kenyan tribal language does not have a lot of written literature, so it's mainly oral. The child is exposed to both Swahili and English outside the house because in Kenya, English is very commonly spoken on the streets. It's not like here, everybody speaks English. English is the medium of instruction in all schools beyond grade 3, and the child therefore learns English and Swahili and the oral tribal language. Okay, next slide. And then I can give you the experience from India, and you know, we can multiply this, but this is a particular example where we have multiple languages. I'll give one example, parent with different languages and changes in the language environment. One parent speaks Hindi and English, one other parent speaks Malayalam and English and Hindi also. So there's a mix of languages spoken at home. The baby is predominantly initially Malayalam speaking, in a Malayalam speaking environment, so learns to speak Malayalam, but can talk to the father in Hindi. Not talk, at least understand. The toddler moves at the toddler stage, around 2, move to Delhi, picks up Hindi, speaking Hindi, continues to speak in Malayalam, mainly with the mother, converses in Hindi with the other parent, and starts hearing English as well. Child starts school in Delhi, starts learning English formally, including learning to read, starts learning Hindi, including learning to read, speaks English, Hindi, and Malayalam to different people. Moves to an English-speaking environment in a bilingual English-Spanish program. Child learns Spanish, learns to speak Spanish, continues with Hindi, knows English, gradually loses Malayalam. But that's because there's hardly anyone to speak Malayalam with. And it knows that it doesn't have to speak Malayalam also. So the question is, if babies are such linguistic geniuses, then why do we struggle to teach children literacy in one and especially 2 languages? They come with that apparatus already unless they have developmental difficulties. So why are we struggling with literacy? So one of the things is that the home language environment varies. The examples I gave before are of more educated parents, But I wanted to show that to say that children with the right environment, both at home and in school, can learn multiple languages. So and any child put in that situation can learn. We shouldn't think that some children cannot. Any child can. But home language environment does matter. There's several studies in the United States which show that children entering grade 1 know between 5,000 to 10,000 oral words, okay? But there's a huge range. So if the child is from poor, or less educated family, it's more likely to know about 2,000 words. And at the richer, higher educated parents, it's almost 18,000 words. Why is that? Because of course, the better off parents, they spend more time talking, they may spend time telling stories, they may talk parentese much more, etc., etc. So this does make a difference. I don't know if we have any data in Kerala. I could not find anything. Maybe somebody can speak about that. In fact, I couldn't find anything in any Indian language. So why is it difficult? Because the encounter with the written word is very difficult. And of course, part of the reason is that the written word was written by adults, not by babies. So, they didn't think of what was needed for babies. And as, again, Dr. George referred to history, languages have developed in different parts of the world. They have evolved over years, centuries, and they incorporate many words from other languages also. So babies' brains are wired more for listening and speaking, as he said. Reading is really not very natural, right? It doesn't come naturally to them. But oral language is a precursor to reading. And to read, a child has to understand that a visual symbol corresponds to a sound or group of sounds. Now that may look so trivial to us, but I don't think we should underestimate how difficult it may be for a child. I had a personal experience when I tried to teach older lady, in Delhi. I tried to teach her Hindi, and I was writing out the letters and so on. And then after some time, I realized that what she was not understanding was that this squiggle I was making on the page, that corresponded to a sound. She just didn't get that, whereas I took that as being very automatic, that, well, that's how it is. So I'm just explaining that things that we assume are very, very not natural actually require learning another skill. And this process has to become automatic for a child. So it must immediately see that this group of graphics, drawings, right, correspond to a certain sound, and that they link together into words and so on, as was explained earlier. Now, another complication is that some languages have transparent orthographies, or more transparent orthographies, meaning writing systems, and others are opaque. So let's take English. It's considered more opaque one. If you take the sound N, na, it's signified by the letter N, right? But so in 9, it's okay. It's na sound. But if you put the N in NG, then it becomes like sing. It's no longer sing, right? It's sing, the nga sound, which in English requires 2 letters. And you can multiply that in many ways. So money has 1 N, but penny has 2 N's, right? But the sound is still N. So English is not that transparent, and it requires learning that. Malayalam and Indic languages are generally more transparent. There's a single correspondence, a one-to-one correspondence between a sound and a letter or group of letters. But there are combinations also. We have ksha, So you have like the n sound in Malayalam, you'll have the n, the n, the in, you have multiple variations of that. Each of them has a different symbol. And then you have combinations. Ksha, there's k and sh. That it is another graphic, right? So the child has to remember that. And of course, language systems like Chinese and Japanese requires actually learning a lot of symbols. Something like Chinese has 7,000 words. So it's not till early secondary education that children can actually have complete mastery, and it requires a lot of effort and repetition and so on to master that. But still, that doesn't prevent Chinese people from becoming literate. They are literate, fully literate, actually. So scripts also differ in their visual complexity. Like I said, Malayalam is transparent, but I remember showing it to my son once, and he said, "Oh, it's just all squiggly, all round, and everything looks round. So how do you distinguish one letter from another?" Now, that's how it looks like to a person who is not familiar with script. That's almost impossible to understand the difference between one letter and another. And then there are very many letter combinations, as I said. So in the process of learning to read, I mean, this is just a straight quote, a child must be able to decode the graphic units of a particular orthography into spoken language units. So it must actually be able to decode that. And reading becomes fluent when decoding is automatic and words can be directly and effortlessly retrieved from the lexicon. So this is the process. The problem is sometimes you can do that and still not understand what you're reading. And that is, because children just learn how to decode it and then to just read it out, okay, but without the intonation, for example, which conveys meaning. So they don't understand necessarily what they're reading. And we sometimes think that this is enough. But anyway, this has to be there before you can comprehend. If you're just reading like, the donkey went, and then you struggle. If there are 5 more words after that, the child will have forgotten what was in the first part of the sentence and will not understand the meaning. So this automaticity, becoming automatic and being able to retrieve the correspondence between the sound and the graphical representation of it is absolutely necessary. So the question is, with that difficulty, so you have your genius babies who can understand oral languages, many of them, okay, and then you have the difficulty of reading. How do you then teach 2 languages in school? And traditionally in school, one language is taught from beginning and used as medium of instruction, and second language, if it is taught at all, is taught as a subject, sometimes in secondary, sometimes increasingly from grade 1. So this idea has come a lot from monolingual countries like many European countries and America and so on, that this is going to be tough to teach 2 languages or more to children. So the question is, can we then use 2 languages as medium of instruction, or even just to teach children how to read in 2 languages? And related to that is, do children learn equally well in the 2 languages? And do they also progress academically? Because these are the questions that people, parents especially, have. So we look at a few models of bilingual education. Next slide. And first, I want to just clarify what I'm using the term bilingual education here. So L1 is usually the first language. L2 is what they call the target language, the language that the child may not be familiar with. Now, with the examples I gave you before, even this is itself open to question because, what is L1 and L2 in those examples that I gave you? But let me start with the traditional definition. And the bilingual education means education in the two languages. Both are used as medium of instruction in the program. And the instructional goal is that children become proficient in both languages and acquire academic competences in other areas of study. It's different from teaching a second language as a subject. And it's also different from colonial practice, which may still continue today, where the colonial language L2, English in English colonies, French in French colonies, was primarily used as language of instruction. In fact, in Francophone countries, just used from grade 1. In Anglophone countries, usually after primary level. But L1, the vernacular, was never used afterwards. So I say this because in Kerala, sometimes when we talk about bilingual education, people mean the use of Malayalam and English in the same class. There's a phrase for that which is called translanguaging, but it's not the same as the models of bilingual education that I'm going to explain next. Yeah. So one of the biggest proponents of bilingual education, and it started very early in Canada in the 1960s. But I also want to mention that there was a kind of political reason for it, and many times things in education arise because of political necessity also. Actually, at that time, there was a strong separatist movement in Quebec for independence. From Quebec is the French-speaking province of Canada. Maybe not many people here know that Canada is bilingual, and there's a province which is mainly French-speaking because the French conquered that, and then it became part of Canada. But the motivation for this bilingual program in Quebec was that the English speakers in Quebec felt their children must learn French adequately in that province, okay? But they should also retain English, which is the mother tongue, plus the language of higher education. And the models that were evolved in Canada were called the immersion model. That's like you put a child in a bath or in a swimming pool, right? You don't let them sink, but you fully immerse the child. So as one example, students are taught entirely in French for at least half the time and entirely in English for the rest. But it could also be variations of that, 100% or 70% or whatever for the initial years. And there are many models of this early immersion, when this immersion is done preschool to grade 3, or it could be middle immersion or late immersion, grade 4 to 5, or in secondary, and different combinations of the time that is spent in one language versus another language. But it's a very structured program. It's not just like any teacher deciding, oh, today I'm going to use French or I'm going to use English, or, it's very structured. The teacher knows how they have to teach. They are compartmentalized. That is, when you're being taught in French, you speak in French. When you're taught in English, you speak in English, no matter what the level of the language. But overall, there was a lot of research done on this, and they were very, very positive. So contrary to what people thought, that the kids would not learn French or they would not learn English well enough, or they won't do well in the academics, they were doing actually very well. And as a result, these programs were adopted all across Canada, including in the non-French areas, and including for languages like Punjabi and Ukrainian and so on, where the children had that as the first language. But most interesting was the amount of research that was done, and there there are obviously caveats to this, but the three main things were that the children in the immersion programs, they were better in French L2 than those who studied French as a subject. So they learned that second language better. There was no negative effect on the learning of the English language just because they were spending time between two languages. And they do as well academically in other subjects as other students. And that's the reason why the program spread. Okay, next one. And this is called, in general, the Canadian model and models like that are called additive bilingualism, in the sense that they add on, right? Children learn both languages, and that is a goal of the instruction. And it is also to help the children, that there's a belief that having two languages is actually good for the child's development. It's not detrimental. That's the philosophy that permeates this approach. Yeah. Now, another country that has had a lot of bilingual education is United States. Here, the motivation is, we think US is just English speaking. Actually, there are tens of millions of immigrants coming from Latin America, Spanish speaking mainly, but also many other nationalities, not just Indians, but, you have Poles and you have Somalis, you have many Arabic-speaking people, Chinese people, Japanese people. The US has all of them. But there are three main models, mostly for the Spanish-speaking people, because they are now large numbers in many classrooms. One is called a transitional bilingual program, where the children are taught in Spanish for just the first few grades, and then they move to English. Okay. And in fact, Spanish is no longer used after that. Then there's the developmental bilingual programs, which are again for, say, the Spanish-speaking people, children, and children are taught for several grades, 50-50, 90-10, whatever, the ratio is of their mother tongue and English. And then there are two-way bilingual programs where the class consists of both the Spanish-speaking children as well as English-speaking children, and both are taught Spanish and English. So for the English children, L1 is English, L2 is Spanish, and for the Spanish-speaking children, L1 is Spanish, L2 is English, and yet, the goal is that the English-speaking children should become proficient in Spanish, the Spanish should become proficient in English, and the academic proficiency of both should be higher, should be good enough. But of course, because English is the language of higher studies, in a way you can say the English-speaking children don't have to try as hard to become proficient in Spanish. But leaving that aside, next thing is that the research on this was, so one phrase to understand here, the first program in that US list would be called subtractive bilingualism. That is, the first language is lost after some time. It's just used as a transition. And the other two that I mentioned are additive bilingual programs. So generally, educationists think that the additive bilingual programs are better for the child's development. But what you see around the world, especially in developing countries, are the subtractive ones. Next. So the research from this, which I haven't outlined, has also generally been very positive. Okay. But in general, all those in the additive programs did better. The ones in the subtractive bilingualism also did better than others, but not as good as those in the additive programs. Next. So the issues that, however, require further research is that most of this research is done for languages that are a bit similar, at least visually, like Spanish and English. And the issue is when you have different orthographies, do you need different instructional strategies? And some evaluations in Canada have shown that Arabic and English bilingual programs, very distinct languages, they've also been successful. But and Canada also has a lot of other, as they call it, heritage language bilingual programs, Punjabi English, as I said, Ukrainian English, and so on. And there are evaluations of those also. The another question is that when you have distinct writing systems, is it better to introduce the literacy instructions simultaneously or successively? Because a child has to learn two different writing systems. We don't have enough research to show which is better. And then specifically on teachers in bilingual education, what are their skill requirements and what are their professional development needs? There's not that much research on that also. Next. So bilingual education exists in many other parts of the world, okay, just because people have lots of languages. South Africa is one case, 12 official languages, that includes a sign language. But and according to the Constitution, any language can be used as medium of instruction. In practice, English is used after grade 2, from grade 3 onwards. And there's huge, discussion in South Africa, a lot of research, because learning outcomes in South Africa are very poor, and partly it's ascribed to the, lack of enough learning in the home language, so that children transition very quickly to English and they don't have enough proficiency in that. Now, South Africa has a long history of apartheid, and there's all that history also to deal with, but anyway, this is one country we should look at. Many other African countries have a colonial heritage, Francophone countries have their own issues. Francophone Arab countries, Morocco, Algeria, etc., they also have this question of when do you shift from Arabic to French. Vietnam is a very interesting country because there are a lot of ethnic minorities, and different policies have been tried. Plus, Vietnam has been dominated by France, and then the Americans and Chinese and so on. So their L2 has changed quite often, and they've had to adapt according to that. And yet, remember, Vietnam did very well in the PISA some years ago. So clearly they're doing something okay. I don't know how much their ethnic minorities were represented. And Latin America, a lot of bilingual programs, especially for children of indigenous communities who have their own languages, but the dominant language is Spain. But almost all these are subtractive bilingual programs. The original language gets lost, and it is inheritance of our colonial past, right? Many of these countries have had that. Next. So the research findings on language learning, if you were to summarize it, it is that if the first language, or whichever language, it doesn't have to be mother tongue, whatever is the first language, is not fully developed, and the second language is not learned well, then children's cognitive development is affected. So at least one language must be learned well to develop thinking and problem solving, and lack of proficiency in a language prevents broader participation in language, in broader learning of other subjects. And we should never confuse that picking up some words or phrases or ability to decode while reading. Children in Kerala can just read you a passage. They can even recite a passage fully, a story they can tell fully, right? That is not enough, because they don't comprehend, let alone reason and problem solve in that. Next one. So what then are some issues to consider for Kerala? It's not very long. I'm coming to the end of my presentation. So I don't think we can call these models in Kerala, but there are tracks in which children are learning in different ways. They're learning languages in different ways. So if you look at the government and state aided sectors, so children could be in any one of these tracks. You study Malayalam medium up to standard 10, then you do English +2. You do Malayalam medium up to standard 7, then you do English medium in high school and +2. You can do up to standard 4, then you go to English medium. Or you can be studying English medium from pre-primary up to +2. So these are not deliberate instructional models or programs. They're just kind of tracks that children have to choose, either because their parents want them or because school is available in one medium or not another medium. And in the private unaided schools, of which now 30% are in unaided schools, mostly they're English medium from pre-primary to the top. And many children from private unaided, they go to government aided schools after standard 4 and standard 7. Maybe in the same language, maybe not. I don't know. We don't have information on that. So at least for the first group, those in the government and aided schools, it's not a program of choice. It's maybe due to the availability of English medium sections or non-availability of that. So we have a kind of bilingual program, but it's not really an instructional program. It's kind of tracks into which children fall, where you happen to be in an English medium and you're using some materials. You may have the teacher who may speak English or may not speak English. It's kind of random, okay? Next one. But are they additive or are they subtractive? I would say most of them are subtractive. And they're very loose, as I said. Translanguaging is the word that is used when you use many other words from another language to teach, in, say, English, you will start using Malayalam. I think our moderator said that this happens. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It's happening all across India, but it is not deliberate. It's left to the teacher, what they do, what they don't do. And many of them don't even do that. They just read from the textbook because they themselves don't know how to use English. So English medium often means just reading from English textbooks, copying something from the blackboard, right? Writing your exams. But often the teaching and comprehension is done in Malayalam. So we don't achieve one of the main goals of language learning, which is that at least one language must be learned very well so that you can develop your higher order cognitive thinking, right? I mean, it doesn't matter if it's Malayalam or English, but at least one of them you should learn very well. And the transition from one medium to another is very abrupt. So you go from, say, class 7 to class 8, and you're suddenly moved from Malayalam to English. There's no transition. There's no help, actually. And this is where a lot of children then fail, or they don't succeed at all. Next. So I will end with this. I think what we really have to think is, what are our instructional goals in language? Is it proficiency in each language, English and Malayalam, or one of them, both languages, or one of them? Does it differ according to the stream the child happens to be in? And are teacher preparation programs aligned with these instructional goals so that you actually can teach something meaningful in the classroom? Or if you, as Sandhya teacher said, you learn all about Chomsky's theory and somebody else's theory, and that's all very good, but when you go to the classroom, what you face is very different reality, and the teacher doesn't know what to do because the teacher has not been taught what to do. For our situation, does not have the materials. One thing I didn't go into in great detail is the need for materials. So if you only have the textbook, the child is not going to learn the other language very well. You need a lot of reading materials to be able to develop that kind of automatic, decoding and so on. So I would therefore stop here.